Hello and welcome to the dark side. I have just realized something I need to do quickly, which is sort out the live stream on Facebook. So that's what I'm going to do. Welcome, Mr. Storm. How you doing?
Sup?
Bless you. So I'm just going to sort out this privacy status so that I can hear y'all and see you all. And I don't have to worry about not being able to see your comments. Right. So welcome to the dark side. We are really glad that you join us here on YouTube, Facebook for the dark side. The dark side, where we take a different look educationally, discussion wise, where you discover new things about the world and how to look at and interpret information, process new things. We are here to share, discuss, enlighten, and discover new sides of the world. This is your daily dose, or weekly dose, I should say, with TC Storm and myself, Pastor Purple, Tabitha Purple. Right. Today, we are going to be hot on some topics, but I have a question for our followers. I have a question for those who are following along. Do you know anyone who of South African origin who can help me out? Help us out here on the dark side. So I have a new story that I wanted to cover, which is the Zulu people have crowned a new king, King Mzuzulu. And so he was crowned in a historic moment in South Africa. And I really wanted to unpack it. I really wanted to have a discussion with somebody who could help us to understand what this long-running monarch's crown will be. It's a historic event that he was crowned nationally in a public ceremony, etc. So if you know anyone of South African origin or who is a historian who would be happy to come on the dark side to talk about this, I would love to. It's a really interesting one. I think our people here would love it. But hit me up, let me know, add in the comment section, tag me, introduce us, tag them. I think it will be really good. I think it really helps us to understand the world better if we actually talk to people from the region or who know about these things. So if you know anyone from South Africa who'd be willing to have a conversation with us here on the dark side about the crowning of the new king out in South Africa for the Zulu people, which has had a historic moment because the president of South Africa actually gave him a certificate and everything. It's huge news. Please help us out. Write us, tag us, put it in the comment section, do the thing. All right. That's the first thing. That's a little bit of business out of the way, or a little bit of a request, I should say, out of the way. News stories for today. So we always cover a couple of news stories here on the dark side, and then we dig in and we look at one story in particular. Today's story is going to be covered by two news stories. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk to you about Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, who's actually recovering in hospital after a hammer attack. He had to have surgery for this. Paul Pelosi, her husband of U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was attacked in their home by a hammer-wielding intruder. He was 82. He is 82. He suffered a fractured skull and other injuries. The person had come into the home screaming, looking for his wife, and he managed to lock himself in a bathroom and call the police, but obviously hammer wielders broke down the door and got to him. And to be honest, this has not made front page news around the world. I find it quite shocking because it feeds into a narrative that we are not really tackling or dealing with. As we continue to propagate ideas of extremism within white nationalism, etc., violence is becoming much more prevalent. And this is just one in the long line of incidents since it's become more acceptable and mainstream again to be feeding this kind of conspiracy theory, anti-liberalism, and all of these ideas. It's become more mainstream, and so therefore the violence aspect is becoming much more mainstream, and we are seeing these attacks more and more frequently. We are seeing them boldly being done. We're seeing them being defended from all corners as well, and so much so that I tagged a Twitter account where somebody had gone to great detail to actually break down this event and they have subsequently had to take down the Twitter thing, lock off the comments for everything, because the backlash and the conspiracy theories trying to shout them down, and to tell them that all of this is just made up, etc., when there is literally a human being lying in a hospital recovering from injuries of being hit with a hammer. And people are trying to say that this is all not real because of their extremism is really quite disturbing. And so I wanted to bring Mr. Storm in to find out actually his thoughts on why we should be concerned with this event, why this is something that should have been on all of our radars and should continue to kind of give us cause, or at least pause for thought. I'll put you on now.
I think not. Right. Let's see. Firstly, I just want to correct language here. It wasn't a hammer attack. The hammer did not attack Nancy Pelosi's head.
Sorry. No, that's not what I meant to say at all, but okay, thank you.
Right? It was a Trump supporting, I wanted to say maniac, but I said Trump supporting, so that would be redundant. It was a Trump supporter. And by saying Trump supporter, of course, I'd like to say conspiracy theory believer, but then that too would be redundant. I'd like to say idiot, but that too would be redundant. Look, these people are dangerous and they are radicalized. And I think this is part of white supremacy, that it does not recognize and treat these people in the same way that it would if these people prayed to Allah.
Well,
because had there been a Muslim person who went around attacking people with a hammer, firstly, they'd be dead. But this will be declared a major terrorist incident. Right? So I just want to point out the disparities and how disingenuous it is not to treat these incidents in the same way, or these people, or to regard these people in the same way. A radical person, doesn't matter what your belief is, if you are radically inclined in a certain way and believe violence is acceptable, then you are a danger to people. And I say specifically where violence is agreeable to you, because of course you have pacifists who are radical.
Well, there is that.
Right? So, but look, if you don't believe in violence, the only harm you are to is yourself, really. Or the only person at risk of being harmed really is yourself.
Oh, there is that.
And that's your choice to make.
Well, I think it's a fair point. I mean, Outhouse Ministries, thank you very much for just joining in there to laugh at me. You do not need to lock up your toolbox tonight. I did not mean that the tool alone walked into his house and hit him in the head with a hammer. I think
Andy Manning will be upset if that happened.
Andy Manning gonna be well vexed. Listen, one of the things that really strikes me is that the police are declining to comment. The suspect is in custody. No one wants to talk about it. There's no one available for comment. This is how many days later, and we're still not getting, full information. This isn't being splashed across every newspaper that these people, the radicalized element is really dangerous, and that feeding and continuing to feed radicalization is actually a dangerous thing to do. And I think that is something that is a dark side topic 100%. How do we deal with radicalization? How do we deal with the way that the world is working and how we stand against that, because it does come at a consequence. You know, radicalization is often followed by violence, whichever your disposition. But the fact that no one's talking about this type of radicalization, that it's being normalized, that it's being acceptable, that police are refusing to comment on it, refusing to have the dialogue, refusing to almost press charges, it feels like sometimes. And this is Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House's husband. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if it's even there, what happens to ad infinitum, that all of the people that are caught in the crosshairs? So yeah,
I think one of the things, I mean, you talk about the fact that it was her husband who was injured, but he actually broke into the house asking for her and saying, "Where's Nancy?"
Right.
So we are talking about a direct threat. I believe she is the third highest ranking.
Mm-hmm.
So if Biden and Kamala went down, she's next in line to be president.
Mm-hmm.
And we are talking about somebody breaking into her house, seeking to do her harm, quite possibly kill her. I mean, it's a miracle her husband isn't dead, because he's in hospital with a fractured skull.
He's 81, let's be clear, you know. A hammer to the skull at any age is going to be dangerous, but at 81, it's a miracle he's not dead.
I'm like, well, we all know that this guy is, well, I'm darker than the perpetrator. I'd go as far as to say you're darker than the perpetrator.
Well, and there's that. So, other news stories that have come out this week that I just want to touch on a little bit. One is, there's a few stories actually out of the Netherlands that have really caught my eye this week. One is that there's been some research done into algorithms, job algorithms particularly. And basically it finds out that, surprise, surprise, there is no surprise here, of course, that if the people doing the programming have racism, discriminatory beliefs, ideas, and practices, then the machine doing the job searches and the algorithms will therefore have discriminatory practices built in with it. And so the Netherlands have discovered this, of course. The job searches in the algorithms are matching people with according to your ethnicity or gender, and they are actually producing discriminatory practices. Women are being put in for jobs that have a lower salary range. Different ethnicities are only getting jobs that are manual labor, so on and so forth. So the recommendations, the algorithms that kind of fuel your recommendations, fuel how you look and search, are actually biased. Surprise, surprise, because the people who are, and biased is not the right word, they are discriminatory, because the people who are programming them are discriminatory and are built into that system. And so therefore, and because the system is discriminatory and continues to fuel that, this will progressively get worse as time goes on. And I really wanted to kind of just touch on it, but maybe this is a dark side topic all of its own, to talk about how this actually develops within the world, because more things are becoming algorithm based. And so how do we exist in a world that becomes algorithm based if those people who are programming are going to be, of course, birthed, bathed, and brought up in a white supremacist ideology, and therefore that is just going to be caked into a system that we now all rely on. And it's not as simple. I don't think the simple solution sounds simple, then we just make our own systems. It's not as easy when banking, job searches, so on and so forth, which are everyday kind of things, are actually discriminatory. Any thoughts?
Well, my first question would be, is this actually an unintended consequence? So is this a bug, or is this actually a feature of the system?
Well, maybe that's a dark side topic. Maybe we can't answer that question right now. Maybe that's a dark side topic all of its own. Because part of me thinks, you know, nerds making algorithms, if I put it in a generalization, maybe are not totally aware of all of the things that they're doing when they're making the algorithm. But by the algorithm learning, the AI learning our behavioral patterns, we are feeding all of that negative stereotypes. And there was, as far as I remember, some research to suggest that as the AI learns, it actually learns the discriminatory patterns from us. It goes the other way around as well. So not only are we feeding it by making it that way, whether consciously or unconsciously, but then when the AI begins to learn the patterns and the rhythms, it's learning white supremacist colonial patterns and rhythms, right? It's learning the discriminatory practices that we have in our everyday life. And if no one is consciously going in and consciously saying, hang on, our world is discriminatory, we need to consciously go in and edit and teach the AI to do something different from the get-go, then yeah, you end up with, so I don't know, maybe it's like a whole topic in and
Once
of
again,
itself.
is that a bug or is it the feature? Because we know people discriminate.
Yes.
We know algorithms discriminate. The fact that you are not designing the algorithms or the AI to intentionally avoid discrimination would seem to suggest at best it's negligence or indifference, and at worst it's intentional.
Well, there's that. There is that. So then a couple of other kind of points, I guess, just little notes or maybe future topics coming here soon. And by all means, anyone who has a question, please just pop it into the comment section. We love to interact and talk with you, join in the conversation. Just add yourself along to the comment section and we'll pop you up on screen. A couple of other little news items that have made the Financial Times. One is that the Netherlands may be the first Western country or first country to hit its limits of growth. Now, this was a fascinating article because we're hearing conversations all across the globe about possible recessions, how economies grow. People are listening to all of these conversations. But I do wonder if we understand what's actually being said when it talks about economic growth and what they're actually their meaning and how this actually is a self-imploding system, which we've mentioned before on the dark side. So at this point, I'm just going to bring in the comment we have. Unintentional discrimination is still discrimination. 100% agree. 100% agree. Thank you very much. Back to our earlier topic of looking at the AI discrimination and the algorithm of discrimination. Yeah, I think discrimination is discrimination. And if we're not actively, intentionally beginning to unpack that as quickly as we can, we're going to find ourselves with more than just anecdotal problems, where people talk about the fact that machines don't register darker skin. We're going to find ourselves with problems that really do create real big issues within the world. So there's that. But yeah, so there's an interesting bit about growth.
Just to interject, machines do recognize darker skin, or they can, because they damn well make sure security cameras do.
Yes, but I mean, I was talking about dispensers. I was kind of doing my hand to show dispensers. That was a whole thing where people were talking about dispensers and dryers were not made to recognize the darker skin tones. And again, they were not created to recognize. They were not created to recognize darker skin tones because people who made them were not thinking about that. So with all of this being said, the two news stories that we're going to do. Oh, the other news story out of the Netherlands. So there's a couple of Dutch stories this week because there really are some interesting things happening here that I think are forerunners for everyone else in the world. I think in that case they're having this. So one is the idea that the Netherlands may be the first country to have hit its limits of growth. The population's about 17 million now. Back at 15 million, they were saying we're full. We're at 17 million. We're in a housing crisis. There's not enough houses, apparently, and so on and so forth. There's all these numerous problems. But also, if you just don't have, where are you growing to? If you have hit your limit of people, then surely you're sustaining. And how does that work? And is is the idle growth, is the idle profits? Is always my question. So that's one. Another one is Europe's energy crisis. The end of Europe's energy crisis may be in sight, just off the back of some stuff out of the Netherlands. They've had some deliveries of energy here, and they actually went negative for a little while in the energy prices. It was for about an hour that the energy prices went negative because they had nowhere to store the energy that they were receiving. And therefore, we had this moment of negative energy prices for about an hour, and then it went back up, of course. So I had immediate questions about how we actually set the price of energy. That's one thing. Another thing is that the bullfights. So there was a legal discriminatory claim that was put in place. And basically, really interesting little story. Red Bull effectively closed down a business, just a small business, that had its own little energy drink out here in the Netherlands called Bullfight, or Bulldog is the official term. And they ended up, Bulldog actually sued or countersued Red Bull. So they took the claim to the High Court, and it ended up the case in their favor that Red Bull's practices were discriminatory. And actually, there was enough difference between the product that people would have known that they were not drinking a Red Bull, that they were drinking some other drink. And therefore, the owner has put in a request for 49 million. The reason I highlight this, because they all link to an idea of profitability. And if we allow companies to just set the agenda, what does that actually mean to the people who are in the system, who are using these products, and who are using who are living their life within a system that is run effectively by companies? So those are my thoughts. Right. So those are the news stories. Any thoughts on the news stories before I do an intro?
Yeah, the energy one is actually an interesting thing. We spoke about oil companies and their exploration, and the fact that actually this fuel crisis is generally manufactured, and the oil prices are overinflated. Well, you spoke about delivery of energy and the fact that they had nowhere to store it. Just two things. One of the reasons why Ukraine's energy infrastructure is being attacked by Russia is because Ukraine actually exported electricity to Europe, right? So it's to further increase the energy pressures in Europe. But the reason I say, or what I want to do is actually highlight the fact that this is one of the issues of energy companies being privatized and not nationalized. So in the UK, energy prices have gone up far more than they have in the rest of Europe. But, and this is one of the problems of the privatization of energy companies, there is a wind farm off the shore of Scotland where they only have one turbine running most of the time. And the reason for this is they have nowhere to store the energy that it produces. And this is because the energy company is privatized. So all the money is being sucked out and paid to shareholders. Whereas if it was nationalized, the money would remain within it, and you could have built facilities with which to store the energy. And of course, what would that do? It would decrease the energy prices. Right? So, yeah. And I just wanted to mention that on the energy front. And the other story was about
The drinks company.
right. Yeah. If I recall correctly, the company Bulldog, I believe the energy drink was created by a coffee shop, a famous coffee shop in Amsterdam.
Indeed.
There's no mistaking the two.
No. No, you wouldn't.
There is no mistaking two. And in fact, the Bulldog coffee shop is actually world famous. So the fact is, there's just no mistaking the two. Red Bull just sought to bully what they saw as a smaller competitor.
Yeah, and I think that point of larger companies bullying smaller companies by taking them over, forcing them out, the person has put in a claim for 49 million euros in lost earnings over the last however many years they've been locked in this battle, just goes to prove that regulation is necessary. You can't, if you're going to, you can't leave people to do what they want to do, because when they're left to do what they want to do, they generally do things that harm other people. That's just the way it goes, right? And so we have rules for how people behave. And it beggars belief that people think that you do not need rules for how companies behave, because a company will just do what's in its own best interest. It's not thinking about the long-term ramifications on the well-being of the people in the other position. Now, this gentleman has put in his request for 49 million that he's lost in revenue, of course, but it goes beyond just losing revenue, right? It goes to the heart of your business. It goes to the heart of what you're doing. And also the trauma of being bullied by a rather large company. He's been locked in legal battles for, I think it was 10 years. He won the first round. They countered it and took it to the appeals court. They won the second round. He then said, well, no, and took it to the appeals, to the highest court, and has won, hands down now has won, and said, the court said, no, they're two separate things. Anyone with eyes can see that these things are not the same. The symbols are different. The names are different. What do you mean? This is not copyright infringement. But again, without that's a lot of trauma of dealing with legal fees, lawyers, etc., etc., etc. And you have to be prepared to be in that kind of a battle. And it takes its toll on your business. It takes its toll on you. And I think that when people talk about, oh, we want governments to stay out of, this is one of the big lines that conservatives will often say, we want governments to stay out of business so that business can do what exactly? Steamroller across actual human beings because they can. Because there's no reason, as you say, for Red Bull really to have taken this on, other than to suggest it just decided to bully a smaller player in the market. Well, if the smaller player was doing well, surely market dictates that you should mind your business and just make a better product. No? Oh, we're just going to bully them until they leave the market. So, yeah, you can't have your cake and eat it with these things, is my opinion on this particular subject.
Yeah. Considering who Bulldog are, I'll just keep that comment to myself.
Okay, that seems like a can of worms we're going to avoid. Right, so Mr. Storm, you have been on your travels. You have enjoyed many a country. You went through quite a few in your traveling period, and you have come back with the dark side of travel, of course, which I think our people are tuning in for to hear what it is. So I'm just going to give you a news story that was just published within the last week. It's from the Netherlands. It's about Europe's largest airport, Schiphol. And its biggest provider, its biggest flight provider in the Netherlands, KLM. And it says that KLM lost 175 million. This is the headline. I think this headline it worries me as we go further into the article, that KLM lost 175 million in lost income. And so because of this, it's going to cost, these costs are going to be passed on to the consumers, and so we are going to have to pay higher flights because of the problems that were happening. So it said, of that, 30 million is down due to compensation for passengers. The rest of the lost income is due to cancelled flights during June and September. So unfortunately, we're going to have to pay higher costs. Now, despite all of this chaos, despite all of this lost income, it is important to note that KLM booked an operating profit of 433 million in the third quarter, while sister airline Air France booked 570 million in operating profit. The combined group third quarter met the profit of So this is now their net profit was 466 million. But because of the lost earnings of 175 million, guess what? You and I are going to have to pay higher fares to travel. And so the question becomes, is there a dark side to something that we have thought of it being a light side? Many of us enjoy a vacation. Many of us enjoy taking the time to have a break, especially in a world which has fueled us into work being the dominant force. Holidays, travel, and freedom of movement has become something that wasn't a luxury before the pandemic, but it certainly is turning into a luxury post-pandemic. And it's asking questions of us, questions about our ethicalness of how we travel. So is it questions about climate change are being asked? The Dutch are now going green in more numbers, and so they're not flying. Well, with KLM charging the prices that they do, it's not a wonder they're not flying, love. The car is a little bit cheaper, so they're driving or taking the train or going on much more green options. But there are other questions to be asked, like, is travel a not only sustainable option, but is travel a luxury option? Is there built-in white supremacy into the travel industry? Are we exploitative when we travel? Are we treating our staff badly? Are employers, skipping loopholes because they operate in multiple countries? And we've had this before when we talk about the fact that, flight attendants and those working on planes do not get paid until the doors close, and yet are expected to stand, welcome, help you to your seats, put all the luggage in, be amazing with their customer service all the way through, despite any kind of trouble, until those doors close. They do not start getting paid. That is all really problematic. And so TC Storm, having traveled quite a bit, has come back pondering some of these questions about what is the dark side of travel?
Okay. No, not that view. Not sure I like that view either, but hey.
Hi, I'm looking gorgeous today. What's the issue?
Yeah. No, it's more by comparison me, Beauty and the Beast and all that. Right. So when I came back, I told you a story. I don't know. Did I tell the story last week? I can't remember. Anyway, I told you a story about something that happened. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was traveling while black. But as I started to look into the dark side of traveling, of course, there are other issues that come up. And so one of the things that came out, I started to do some research, and I came across a few papers and articles that were written. And there's a few academic papers that are actually written on this that are actually quite fascinating. And what they do is they talk about how society has become hypermobile. And I'm going to get into some of the definitions of these terms and phrases as we go on. But what they say is that the high mobility that we have in society today is largely due to a socialization process. Okay. And what they say is that contemporary societies assign a high social value to being mobile and the ability to travel.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of this, sorry, not just travel, but be able to travel a large distance, a great distance. So when this happens, it becomes a signifier of social status. This is according to Bowman, 2007, right? And what he then says is that once it becomes a signifier of social status, it then becomes a social necessary. Right? So now what we're doing is we then have to draw in the concepts of wealth, poverty, and class into the concept of being able to travel great distances. So, as I said, I already wanted to speak about traveling whilst black, but now we've got to bring in concepts of class and wealth and poverty into this. Because if you can't travel and you can't travel great distances, then it's an indicator that you're poor.
Yeah, I grew up poor, so I know that's an indicator that I was poor. Like,
Okay.
like,
Right. But
did anyone else grow up poor? Like, we all knew that was an indicator of our poverty, right? We didn't travel to Spain and to France and to Disneyland and XYZ. Like, that was a marker, and you then aspired to travel. Anyway, go on. You asked a question.
no, you asked, did anyone grow up poor? I did.
Yeah, but you traveled, so no one knew.
I traveled.
I grew up genuinely poor. We didn't travel nowhere.
But no, but right. So anyway, now what the sociologists are arguing is that when this happens, what's developed is this what they call a liquid identity. So
liquid identity.
So
Okay.
when travel becomes a signifier of social status, and then it then becomes a social necessity, right?
Okay.
And what they say is that this identity is interwoven with privilege. So access to resources, the internet, smartphones to download timetables, get directions, all of these things. So it's not just simply the fact that you have money to go and travel. It's so you could raise the money to go travel and afford your ticket somewhere. But the problem is you lack all of the other things that go along with the journey and the experience.
Right.
Okay. And just to bring this out, like, so when I went traveling, just come back off some travels, I went with my brother. And I'm not going to say he's boring, but he does all right. We went to Sri Lanka, and where the transportation at the hotel wouldn't take us, he's just like, oh, I'll just get an Uber. Pulls out his phone, puts in, where he wants to go to, done. Right? We go to Thailand now, and Uber doesn't work. They don't have Uber there. So he goes, what am I going to do? So he downloads an app called Grab. And it operates very similar to Uber. I think it's actually a better business model than Uber. But off of Grab, I mean, it's like Uber Eats, taxis, all sorts of stuff all in one. Anyway,
Okay.
Right? But the point is, it's the accessibility and the ease with which you could do that. If you couldn't afford a cell phone, you wouldn't have been able to make the travel arrangements as easily as that. Right. So now, what they also say is that travel increases social capital. Okay, so as your mobility increases, your ability to build networks or network capital increases. And Lawson, in 2006, defines or says network capital is the interrelationship between social relationships and social support. Right? Translation, it's a form of social capital that makes resources available through interpersonal ties. That's Wellman and Frank's definition of it. Okay. So as the world opens up and becomes more global, what they're saying is your ability to travel increases your ability to be profitable because you're able to make more networks and create more networks. And as you create more networks, you're able to make more connections, not just socially, but also in business, in all aspects of your life. If you can't travel, those networks are automatically cut off to you. Okay.
Also, one of our viewers are chiming in with a similar story, but in reverse, in fact, when she grew up, she was spoiled and was able to travel, but since being an adult hasn't, and has only been able to internally travel within the Netherlands. And I do wonder how that shapes your identity when it's the other way around, right? When you were able to use that capital and have that travel experience and do all of that, and then you are ground to a halt in your adult life through circumstances, through life, and are no longer able to travel. But that's a different question, maybe.
Right. So now, here's the thing. Like, there are one of the things that comes out of this is that as travel becomes a signifier of social status,
Mm-hmm.
right? You then bring in marketing and media.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
My old
because it's a signifier of social status,
Mm-hmm.
it's then glamorized in media.
Mm-hmm.
And because the media glamorizes it, it's now seen as a social status. So it's a self-fulfilling circle.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
But the problem that this creates now is that it becomes difficult to move away now from sources of fossil fuel, which planes and cars rely on,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to green fuels. So now we're not only talking about traveling while black, and we're going to go into more detail on that. We're not just talking about class issues, which we're going to talk about more, but now we're talking about environmental issues, right? Because we know traveling in and of itself is an issue. We know that you burn a lot of fossil fuels,
Mm-hmm.
but the fact that people are traveling simply because it's a sign of status, and in order to appear to hold that status, people are seeking that out. And in fact, actually, there's a good anecdotal example of this. Do you remember Shad Moss, aka Bow Wow?
Yes.
Do you remember the story of where he was posing in first class, talking
Thank
about he tried to project a certain lifestyle? So
Mm-hmm.
he sat down in a first class seat, took a selfie of himself, stuck it on Instagram, and then took his behind up and went back to economy with everyone else. And someone was following him on Instagram, saw the picture, took a picture of him economy, and called him out on it. Right. And actually, what they were saying was in some of these papers actually is that one of the signifiers for all of these different tiers you have for
Mm.
travel. So when you get into airlines and you get into the loyalty programs, you have the different tiers. These are all to do with your sense of status, right? So you go chasing the next tier
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it somehow improves your status and your sense of well-being and feeling about yourself. I have a higher status now because I've achieved this tier. Now I've got to achieve this tier. Of course, it also drives their profits and make some more money. But so these are some of the issues that I want to touch on. Okay. So which one would you like to go through first? Would you like to go through the economy? Sorry, not the economy, the environment, class, um, or economy, class, traveling while black?
Okay, folks, help me out. Oh, I'm so torn. What to do? Let's do environment first, maybe?
Okay. So with the environment, of course, we talked about fossil fuels, right? And the fact that what Franberg and Bauman and some other sociologists do is they identify a group of people which they call hypermobile.
Okay.
And they say that these are the extremely wealthy
Mm-hmm.
or people that are traveling for business.
Okay.
Okay. But part of the travel for business is also status
Mm-hmm.
because in today's technological world, I don't need to travel to see you, to
Yeah.
have a meeting,
We're doing
right?
it now. Like we're all online in different places
You
and we're all having a conversation.
know, Listen, I can tell you just from the two comments, I can see that we're speaking to at least people on two different continents right now,
Right, precisely.
right? So I don't need to travel. But this hypermobile group, okay, that these sociologists have defined, this is the impact that they are having on the environment, right?
Okay.
And I want you to understand how disproportionate this is. So Sweden, 3% of the population
Mhm.
account for almost quarter of the international travel.
I'm sorry, pardon, what now? 3% of the Swedish population account for quarter of
Almost
the
quarter.
entire world's
No.
travel.
Of Sweden's
Oh,
international
Sweden's
travel.
travel. Ooh. Oh,
Forget that. Forget, you know,
I was ready to just fall down on the floor and say people are living a different kind of dream. Wow, but that's still quite a lot.
no,
3%.
it's still a lot. It's extremely disproportionate to the population.
Right.
3% are responsible for all international travel,
That's insane.
right? But it gets worse.
Oh,
I'll give you another figure that's even worse.
okay.
In France,
Mm-hmm.
5% account for just over 50% of the total distance covered.
5% of the French population account for 50% of their travel. That's insane.
Yep.
That's really disproportionate. I mean, you know, if some of us who follow along may be thinking, if I was growing up, I grew up regular poor person, and I dreamed the dreams of traveling, so when we talk about class, I fall into that category of dreaming about travel and wanting to travel and da 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 as a sign of a marker. But I would never have entered my mind that 5% of a population could account for 50% of the travel, which means you're doing the most, right? It's unnecessary, surely.
It's unnecessary, but the environmental waste that you are now responsible for, I mean, it far outweighs.
The one person who takes a
It's so
vacation.
greatly disproportionate.
To the one person who takes one vacation, right? It's because I think about it this way. I think as the average person who goes on a vacation, once every how many years to a foreign country that's far, far away, right? So the average is like once every couple of years you'll go on a long haul vacation, right? So as that average person, there is a lot of guilt being put on us to cut down and to stop back and to pull back our carbon emissions. Well, forget that. You may as well just talk to your 5% of your population, because if they quit like half, that's a quarter of your carbon emissions gone right there. Like, just
but
talk to them.
but
It's a smaller part of the population.
yes, it's a small part of the population, but I think also if you spoke to businesses,
As I said, it's a
right?
smaller part of the
Yeah,
population to speak to.
here's the thing: if you were serious about cutting down and cutting
Mm,
out greenhouse emissions,
mm.
place a higher tax on business class seats and first class seats, and take that tax and invest it in renewable energy sources.
Oh, I hear the ifs, ands, and buts already. I hear people going, buts, buts, but I mean, in reality, the people who are traveling the most are the ones that are sitting in those seats, huh?
Well, it's
50%.
not just sitting in those seats. I think you should place a tax not just on business class and first class, but seats that are bought for business purposes.
Hmm.
As I said, there's no need for it. But once again, here's the thing: traveling is a status symbol. So when an employer comes to you with a job, one of the perks that they trot out is the ability to travel.
Well, I've got to say, as a pastor, I have enjoyed that. That's something that I have enjoyed. It is a perk of my job, is that I have a little bit of freedom. It's not a huge amount, but I've been able to enjoy traveling because people are happy to have me come to their country and do something within
Mhm.
their space and physically be present. That has drastically changed since the pandemic, because now all they need to do is invite me into a Zoom room, which has drastically cut that out. And it feels like a loss, I'm going to be honest with you, but I understand the point that you're making. So I
No,
will just sit with that. I will
here's the
just
thing. But I think that this is the thing. If the so, for example, if you place a tax on these seats, what it means is that these people should hopefully travel less.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So it's not like whereas okay, so I know people personally that will travel on flights and go to different countries, not because they need to for business. They do it on the business. The business will pay for it, and they'll say to me, "I really didn't have to, but hey, it's a trip. Why not travel? It's on the company's dime. The hotels are on the company's dime. Food costs on the company's dime." So it's all of these things that factor into it. Travel then becomes a perk of the job.
Okay, so at House Ministries has asked, is that supposed to be a perk? He's always considered it a liability. What do you mean a liability? That's quite interesting.
I've seen the way he drives, so yeah, that would be a liability. Actually, funnily enough, we're going to come on to that actually on
What
driving.
liability? Oh, driving. Okay.
Driving and liability. So
Okay.
anyway, but that's part of the issues with the economy. I'm mindful of not the economy, the environment, and I'm mindful of time factors here.
Okay. So I want to do class. I want to do class next. It's a good thing that our House Ministries has a good sense of humor. Thank you for giggling along with us. I'd love you to touch on class, just because I think the intersectionality between race, class, and gender is just always fascinating. So please go ahead, touch on a little bit of the class issues that you were talking about.
Right now, the class one is actually um okay.
Okay, so all right, so the liability is having to be apart from your family. Oh, okay, I see, like that. Well, some of us need a break, huh?
Some of us need a break, but you also have to remember that it's a lot of time people go into positions like these things, they're not always married. They're single. They have the
Yeah.
ability to go ahead and do these things. But now to deal with class and poverty issues.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing um, with travel. Um, and it's not just about the concept of travel, it's how you travel and how it's seen. So it's not simply just about going on vacation somewhere. We
Mm-hmm.
all know the status symbol of traveling first class, all of these things. But it's
Mm-hmm.
also when you travel to a place, how are you received by the people in that country,
Yep.
right? And class and race play massive factors in this. Now, um, I'm wondering if I should have done traveling whilst black before doing this.
Go ahead.
Probably, it probably would have made things easier.
Well,
'Cause-
then do traveling while black, and we'll come back and stick a pin in this. There's no problem.
no. Well, you chose class, so I'm gonna do my best because it probably would have made more sense the other way around. But anyway, it's a question of how do the local populace receive you once you've traveled to a place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so this is where um, class interacts and poverty interacts within these things. Okay, from the moment you get onto the airplane,
Mm-hmm.
you go to economy, business, first class, right? You already being categorized by people within that plane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. You're being categorized by the staff, right? Look, and it affects your ability, your status, what benefits are available to you. If you're in first class, your luggage comes off first, right? You get more weight allowance, all of these things. Okay.
Mhm,
And some might say you pay for the benefits of that. And I guess in some ways you do, because them tickets aren't cheap.
mhm, mhm,
But a rich person who travels to a country for work,
mhm,
right? Now, it might only be temporary. It could be for a week. Okay. So I fly into a country for a week to do work. I'm a banker. Fly into a country for a week, do some work. I
mhm,
fly back out, right? I'm seen as coming to the country to work. It's a business opportunity.
mhm,
A poor person who comes to that country to work, whether it be for a week, and we know that you have seasonal workers who come there for
mhm,
short periods of time and then leave.
mhm.
Why are they then called economic migrants?
Oh, oh,
You're not seen as coming to work for a business opportunity,
oh, I listen to you. Hey, hey, an intersection of class I haven't thought about. Oh, new stuff. Oh, listen to that.
right? You're both coming for temporary periods. You're both coming for short periods
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
to do something that will be beneficial financially for yourself,
mhm,
and
mhm,
your plans are to leave.
mhm, 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 mhm.
But economic migrant is now used as a pejorative,
Wow.
and it is only applied to one specific group of people,
And
and
it's to do with
those
their
that are
wealth.
considered poor or of lower class. Right?
Wow.
And I would liken this to the similar ways that the phrases immigrant and expat are used,
Okay, yes. Oh, come on now. Come on, preach on that's a sermon right there. You preach on that one.
right?
Mhm.
Because when white people travel somewhere, they call
Expat
themselves expats. When somebody of color travels somewhere, they're
immigrant.
called immigrants,
Illegal or otherwise, eh?
right? So this is where you start to see the intersectionality of
Mm. Mm.
class with the ability to travel.
Mm. Mm. Do you know, I think very rarely have I used the term economic migrant. I'm not saying I haven't used it, I very rarely used it, but now that you say that, I'm like, "Oh, listen to that." There is a level of discriminate you really have to unpack the language that we use because discrimination is so baked in that you don't even notice it. Like, I didn't notice that you say economic migrant for somebody who's working temporarily somewhere else, whereas business, travel is a whole separate thing and they don't get called economic migrants.
Well, the thought actually didn't come to me till I started to read for this subject. It's not something I've seen in any of the papers addressed or anything that I've read, but it was actually a thought that just came to me. I was like, hold up, wait there's a real discrepancy here
Yeah,
where
yeah,
people
yeah,
can travel for short
yeah,
periods of time and work somewhere.
yeah,
And, if you're rich, you're given a different designation.
yeah. And I mean, if you think about it, like if somebody travels for seasonal work, right? So if you have a business traveler and
Mhm.
they're traveling for an opportunity for seasonal work, if they describe themselves, and you think about this all over the world, if you describe yourself as a business worker, like I'm traveling for business, and it comes out that you're picking fruit, people will literally be like liar and will, break up friendships and relationships over this. This has caused real problems. When young people have tried to, maybe rebrand themselves as they're traveling. Um, and actually, why is there a difference? Why is there a difference between a business traveler and it really is the price of the seat, right? That's it. That's the whole
No,
thing.
it's the income you make.
Yeah,
It's not
that's
the
what I
price
mean.
you
But
see. I could travel on a first class ticket and still pick fruit. The
no, but
problem
my point
is
being is, it's unlikely that a fruit picker is traveling on a first
yeah,
class seat, right? So, and I use the price of the seat to indicate the wealth of the person.
okay.
It's off. I use that phrase in the colloquial sense of how that phrase is used. It indicates the wealth of a person according to where you sit on
Okay.
the plane,
Yeah.
you know. In the context of what you were saying, you know, it is more frequent that a business traveler will have more money and will travel in business class, and thereby it's the price of your seat. Like literally, where did your bum land in the plane because of how much wealth you have?
Mm.
That's the difference between being an economic migrant and a business traveler. And that's very interesting. I'd not, it's discriminatory language and practices are built into everything. That's, I feel like there's tweetable moments here, but continue on so we can we can get.
Yeah. So it just, to reinforce this point is that using Britain as an example, um, when people were voting for Brexit and they were talking about all these foreigners coming over here and taking our jobs,
Mhm,
they
mhm.
weren't talking about the bankers. They
No,
weren't
no,
talking about the people working on Fleet Street. They
no, they
weren't talking about any of these people.
no.
They were talking about economic migrants, those that were lower down on the social ladder,
Mhm, mhm,
right? And so this is how class and wealth intersect with travel, because it's not just about your mode of travel, it's also about how you're received when you arrive at your destination.
mhm.
And because of that, it's a nice little segue into traveling whilst black.
Okay,
So
now.
when I came back from Sri Lanka, I told you the story, and I'll tell it to the viewers now. My brother and I, we were going around to temples, and I had the foresight to take a pair of flip flops so I wouldn't have to keep taking off my socks and shoes and to go into the different temples. He got annoyed because he left his at the hotel. And so he tells our driver, I'm passing a mall. So he says, look, stop. I want to go to the mall. We go to the mall. And I would say it was for their middle class mall.
Mhm,
Um, and so we walk into a store, and we're walking around the store looking for a pair of sliders or something for him to put on. And we are followed around the store. Now, what you need to understand in this is we're the only two black people in there and the only ones being followed around the store.
mm, mhm,
But
mhm.
here's the funny thing. Although we were the only two black people in there, we were the lightest people in there. And we still got followed around the store.
Yeah, because you know, racism, right? Oh, racism is real, man. Racism
Now,
is real.
but and
The
here's
irony of that is hilarious, right?
right. It's absolutely funny,
Just
right?
keeps giving.
But this is where race is so funny because there's another story, and I think I told you this one as well about the hotel we were staying at.
Mhm,
Um, so we're staying at the best hotel in Colombo, and there's this guy there, and listen, this guy, he must have been a raging alcoholic because whenever we saw him, he was off his head. We were leaving the hotel before 7 o'clock in the morning, and he's coming down to breakfast before 7 o'clock, drunk.
it's impressive.
We
It's an
come
impressive
back
feat.
in the night, he's still drunk, right?
It's,
So
impressive,
anyway, but this is how funny race is. So anyway, he's an Arab guy,
which
and he starts talking to. I mean, he's drunk, but he was friendly. He was harmless, and he starts talking to me, and he said, "Oh, your friend that you're traveling with." And I said, "That's not my friend. That's my brother." And he looked at me dead face and said, "But he's black." And he said, "You're Arab." I said, "No, I'm black.
We're brothers.
I said, that's my brother. And he had a hard time accepting this. Anyway, he gets the point. Okay, he accepts that he's my brother, and we move on. But just to add to that, a number of years ago, I went to Egypt. And one of the experiences that struck me, and it's going to come onto another subject later on, is that my appearance is clearly quite ambiguous depending on where I am in the world. When I'm in Egypt, I remember being stopped traveling through a train station, and they had metal detectors. And all I don't know what's going on. I'm just walking through a train station. It's not common to me to walk through a metal detector in a train station. So I start to walk through this doorway, and this policeman, grabs his gun and starts barking to me in Arabic. And I'm not paying attention to what's going on around me. So I wasn't aware of all the cues of people going through the metal detectors. And so he starts barking to me in Arabic. And I said, dude, I ain't got a clue what you're saying. And he says to me, English. I said, yes. And he says, go on through. Right. And for me, ever since that time, it opened my eyes to how Westerners are treated differently than how the locals often treat and police themselves. And that was one of the disparities that I did not like. And it's a dark side of traveling that, so yes, I'm talking about traveling whilst black, but that varies depending on where you are in the world.
Yeah.
And initially, because I looked Arab, to him, he went to treat me as he would an Arab. But the moment you find out I'm a Westerner, I'm treated differently. Right? And so you have all these different factors at play and power dynamics at play when you're traveling. For me, there's traveling while black. There's traveling while black and looking Arab, depending on where I am in the world.
Yeah.
Then there's traveling while black and looking Arab, depending on where I am in the world, and being a Westerner.
And then let me add another one on top of that. And then there's your physicality.
Yes.
Of course, not only are you traveling while black and being 2 meters has a real impact on how you are viewed depending on the country. So being 2 meters, you get a lot of very typical stereotypes. We've traveled together in certain places where everyone's like, did you marry a basketball player? I was like, well, he plays basketball, but not in the way that you're actually trying to be really quite prejudiced and racist about. He likes sports, but no, not what you're saying.
Hold on. What are you trying to say about my skills? Wait. Our house ministries can testify to getting dunked on a couple of times, right?
My point, cheeky. My point being that people have different perceptions of blackness, and so you fit a particular stereotype in certain places where maybe black people are lumped into much narrower categories, and you fit one type: basketball playing black person. Okay, that must be what you do as a profession. Done. And that's it. That's like the whole conversation right there. And then you're treated differently than if we're with average height black people, even if they're in the same color bracket, because they're treated like black people who have no NBA status. So
absolutely.
There's a race, class, cultural kind of interjection of stereotypes that have been portrayed around the world, and those things all interact to lead to you having very distinct travel experiences. Now, if we then add gender to that, because of course you're traveling as a man, if we then talk about the female side of that, you will get a completely different set of scenarios.
Absolutely. And as I said, for me, Egypt was eye-opening to the privilege I have. Right. And I think it's important that we recognize the privileges that we have, even whilst traveling as black, holding the passport that I do gives me certain benefits, privileges, and protections, as opposed to perhaps, say, somebody traveling on, say, Somalian or Ethiopian passport would have, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, but as I said, for me, and anyway, let's go back because we've digressed a bit. But going back to the original story of Sri Lanka and traveling and going into the mall and being followed, that was part of the stereotypes that Black people have that follow them through the world, right? And I think we need to be aware of just how harmful and damaging the stereotypes of Black people are and how pervasive they are. Because, as I said, my brother and I were the lightest people in there. And I mean by a considerable distance, right? But we were identified as Black.
And therefore, it
And
means
therefore
something.
followed. Right. And as I said, I'm not being funny, but it was a middle class mall. Not to be funny, but it was. My brother would only shop in there out of necessity.
Oh, I know what you're trying to say about your brother. Come on now.
You know exactly what I'm saying about it.
Let's just move on. Let's just move on. This game recorded. Let's move on, shall we? Don't know what you're trying to say. Let's move on. Stop your nonsense. No, I think your point is well made about the intersection of class, race, and how those intersect, and particularly class and the effect that class has on the traveling experience. So there's a couple of aspects which I think you haven't covered and maybe you're coming to, but I'm going to try and speed you up just a little bit because we're at an hour and 12 minutes into our show. So let's go. One was the observation then off the back of this class element of saying people who would be considered lower class than you or other class than you would look at you because of your color, because of your class status differently, and have this kind of interaction. Because you're traveling, you have more privilege than those people who live in the country who may have a higher class or what have you disparity than you have. And so as a Western traveler who comes from a lower caste situation, you could travel into an area where you can afford to go into their posh hotels or what have you, but their people can't be in those spaces. And there is this whole element of travel in which you begin to realize that the exclusivity of travel and how it impacts not only the people coming in, so those of us who are traveling to spaces, but it also impacts the local economy. And we can talk about that in places like the Caribbean. There are certain islands in which the locals can't use their own beaches. They've been privatized, poor management, poor ideas, and there are some places where you can't even go to the beach because the beaches have been privatized and you don't have a space where locals can go anymore. And then, well, they live on the island, it's their home, their island, but they've been priced out due to exploitative contracting and methodology and profit racketeering, basically, and corruption in those places. And that exists, around the world as an idea that an outsider can come in, purchase a beachfront property with the beach and say, actually, no locals can come here. Whoop, done. And that's like that would be allowed as a normal thing, and that can happen around the entirety of an island. So you live on an island but you can never go near the water? Huh? What? Without paying a hefty fee, but you're expected to serve the tourists with a smile on your face and a glee in your heart that they're coming and spending money on your island.
Yeah, I mean, that is a part of Darkside I wanted to talk about was, as you say, the when we were in Sri Lanka, went down to breakfast, and the breakfast that was laid out was just immense, and there's plenty of it. And I was sitting there as I'm eating my nice fish curry and rice for breakfast and
You
whatever
got
else I wanted,
question.
my bespoke omelets and everything else you could dream of, right? And I was thinking to myself, how many of the people working here could afford to stay here,
Mhm.
right? But more than that, I was thinking to myself, I'm in Sri Lanka right now, a country which has been in the international news because of fuel shortages, food shortages, IMF having to step in, and all these other measures. And all I can see in this hotel is food in abundance.
Mm.
But all I'm hearing outside of the country in international news is food shortages.
Well, now.
And so when you look at it, one of the dark sides of traveling is that resources are hoarded,
Mhm, mhm,
right? And there's special dispensations made and special loopholes made for foreigners. So, for
mhm,
example, um, Sri Lanka has tourism police, Egypt has tourism police, and other places have police uh, units specifically for tourists.
mhm, mhm,
And I get that tourism can bring in a lot of money to the country and things like that,
mhm.
but you are also taking away resources
Yeah,
from the local people that need it.
yeah, yeah.
Right? And so dark side of one of the dark side of traveling is actually resource allocation,
Mm,
how you can have or be living or be staying or residing in wealth and luxury and opulence and plenty and those around you. In fact, those that are
serving you.
serving you
Mm,
could be living in poverty.
right.
With that said, though, I will say this that working in these hotels, the ones we were staying at, if you worked there, you were doing all right by local standards. It will be seen as a good job, and
Right,
the prospects open up to you, especially being international hotels.
right.
As you can rise up the management ranks and things like that, and then move. But of
Mm,
course, once again, that talks about you moving out of the country, and then
mhm,
that becomes a brain drain. So there's all of these aspects that build into this concept.
mm.
Now, another aspect I want to speak to is actually the arrogance of Westerners when traveling.
Oh, Lord Jesus.
Um, you see the Brits, they go to Falariki and all these other places and create havoc.
Mm-mm. Mhm,
But I think it's more than just the Brits. I think it's actually when you look at Western nations,
mhm.
and I'm whether I agree, no, I'm not even gonna say whether. I don't agree with the stance and laws of this place that I'm
Okay.
about to bring up. But that's besides the point, right? So here we go. The World Cup is taking place in Qatar,
Oh, he's gonna go there.
right? You already have Western nations, football teams, their representatives, people that are planning to go, supporters, talking about human rights in Qatar. They're talking about going there and protesting. In fact, the first protester for LGBTQ rights was just arrested this week in Qatar,
Mhm, mhm,
right? Um, but those are the laws of the land. Now, I can disagree with them,
mhm.
right? But those are the laws of the land. Campaign by all means to have them changed. But I'm going to flip what's happening in Qatar and ask what would the response be? What would the outcry be if plane loads of people flew over to France wearing hijabs. And then started saying, well, it's my human right to wear what I want. People would turn around and say, well, there are laws in the nation that forbid you from expressing your religious rights in this way. Obey the laws of the land. But such is the arrogance of Westerners that we would turn around and say, well, we're coming to your country, we're going to protest, and screw you. Let's see what you do about it.
Well, to me, it's not even the oh, we don't care what you. It's the let's see what we do about it. It's the arrogance of you shouldn't be doing anything to me as a like I will break your law intentionally, but I should not suffer the consequences of breaking your law.
Oh no, take your ass to jail.
You know, I think that's problematic. And you have that. If I move away from the example you're given and then talk about somewhere like the United Arab Emirates, can't even say it, looking at places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and things like that, where they have very strict rules within their country about coverage of your body, signs of infection, so on and so forth. But they set up havens where you can behave in Western ways in Western places, right? Or they don't sell pork in their spaces, but they have specialized supermarkets which are they're non halal, where you can go in and buy your things, but you shouldn't expect that in the regular supermarket. They don't sell that there. You got to go to the one that's for that, right? So there's all of that. But what you then have is Westerners who say, well, I'm just going to do what I want to do because I don't agree with your law and I don't agree with your rules. So I'm going to do this thing, which is offensive in your country, and be drunk in a non-designated space, go out into a different
lashes, yeah.
and then complain that they're being tortured, and this is and I think to myself, but you've been given spaces to operate in the ways that you want to. The society outside of those spaces has their rules. Whether I agree, whether you disagree, they have their rules to believe that you can go out and just do that. And then have the attitude that when people are protesting back in your own country who are from your country, you're not even from that country, right? You're doing it as a spite thing. Like, you can't tell me what to do, I'm going out. But when you then go back to your own country and people are protesting who are from your country about racial discrimination, about whatever they're protesting at that particular moment, you're like, oh no, we'll just leave if you don't like it here. Where's your big bravado of just leave if you don't like it there when you're in other people's country? That's just my simple question. Where is that? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't protest and stand up for other people, and I'm not saying all of that within the conversation, but I think there is a real Western arrogance that goes into other people's countries, intentionally breaks laws, and then says, I don't need to bear the consequence of that because I'm a Westerner. There's no other reason.
Yeah. Well,
because you shouldn't be doing this and you are wrong in the first place. And that's problematic. It's problematic to put on the people that they need to overhaul their entire legal system to suit you. They're okay with their system.
Yeah, look, as I said, I agree with everything that you're saying, and I think, as I said, I used the term Western arrogance intentionally because I think it's something that's born out of white supremacy. And I think part of the problem is that there are a lot of Black people who live in the West who have, because of their proximity to white supremacy, adopted a lot of the ideologies of white supremacy when they travel abroad to other nations and display similar levels of arrogance. And although it wasn't traveling, an example I'd use of this is Kanye West. And where he said this week, he made his anti-Semitic comments and then said, Adidas can't drop me. His proximity to white power and white supremacy, and I'm using those words intentionally, allowed him this false idea that he would somehow be exempt to the consequences of his actions as a lot of his white contemporaries are.
Well, he
And
found
he
out
is
that.
now suffering the consequences. He is now dealing with the reality that he is not exempt from that.
And neither should he, as should
Right?
anybody else. But hey,
Right. Now, the reason why I say and what I do, why I've been specific in how I've the phrases that I've used, is
mhm,
because I believe there's an example just to show the differences in how it is when you travel and you find yourself in difficulties in other countries and
we
the
can talk about
approaches taken, right? So, for example, Terry Waite, when he was taken as a captive,
hostage. Mhm,
right? The British government for decades threw everything they could at
mm,
getting this man home. And so they should,
as they should.
right?
Absolutely.
What happened to Nazneen? What's her
Oh,
name?
Naslina.
Remember her
Ah,
surname. Anyway, she goes to Iran. She gets arrested on some false charges, and it was botched attempt. It was they literally threw her under the bus.
mhm.
And this woman
Zakari.
actually, there you go,
Nazanin Zakari.
right? She ended up spending 5 extra years in jail, longer than she should have,
Mhm,
because the British government was it Boris Johnson? I think it may have been Boris Johnson, made statements publicly that led to her spending longer in jail.
Yep.
And they were indifferent and they were callous and they did not care what happened to her,
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
right? So the consequences, and you can
mhm,
say it's anecdotal, I don't mind. To be honest, I don't have statistics and figures for this. But the reality is that what I see is that when you are not white, the consequences you bear
mm.
for ending up in problems and troubles in another country end up being far greater. And it's often because of actions or even worse, inactions by Western nations and governments.
Well, we can talk about the basketball player. What's the name? Greer, isn't it?
Grimes, Brittany Grime.
Right. You know, the anecdotal evidence,
Mm.
every person that you think of color, because often these stories aren't recorded, of course.
Well,
Often
as
these
I said,
stories don't make the news.
but
The
you have
reason
Brittany
that
Griner.
yeah,
You have Brittany Griner, and then you have the two that went down to North Korea and were
yeah.
willfully breaking the law in North Korea. And the fact that the US government did everything they could to get her back, get them back.
But you often, I mean, there's I mean, a lot of the ones that I know are women. I don't know what the statistics would be for men. I wouldn't know the stories. But then I was also thinking of the um, one that was shot, and she worked for a Western organization talking about
The,
business
the
travel,
journalist,
the
the journalist
journalist, and
in
nothing,
Israel.
nothing,
Yeah.
nothing. But having seen their white male counterparts receive just a graze, and all hell breaks loose, and so these ideas, really the intersection of race, class, and gender when traveling, when working, when being in other people's countries, when moving through spaces that are not your home territory, they come with different pitfalls and challenges. And I think it's definitely, I'm glad we did the episode, because I think there's a lot of weighty information here for people to evaluate. And I don't think that means that you don't travel, and I don't think it means that you be weary of it, but I think knowledge is power, right?
Listen, I have a lot more facts about traveling. I'm mindful of time, so I'm just gonna throw this out. Just two bits of information for you. So we're talking about traveling, driving, and I said I would tell you something about it. Uh, Vehicle accidents actually increase during the summer due to vacationers.
Anyone surprised by that? No.
Right?
I work through the summers. I know what these people are
Mhm.
like to drive. Sorry, anyway, continue.
All right. So that was the first one. What was the second one now? Oh, dark side of traveling that nobody really speaks about is the fact that if you travel a lot, especially when young, socialists talk about the fact that you will have difficulty setting roots or feeling at home anywhere when you reach an older age. So they talk about, there's a real dark side to being exposed and being hypermobile and constantly traveling.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's that it's difficult to find a home.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I mean, I want to say a massive thank you because we did speak about this. You mentioned it since you've been back that you wanted to do the show. But I think you've, as always, informed us brilliantly of the facts, the ideas, the research that has gone into looking at the dark side of travel and given us such a good insight into what we're actually dealing with. And I think that in no way, I hope that people don't leave the conversation thinking that because of class, race, and gender, that travel is out of the question. I
Oh no,
think
travel.
we enjoy travel on this show. We love travel. We're glad that Mr. Storm had his travel. How many countries did you do in the 10 days? 5?
4. France. No,
Doha.
5. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, 5.
5. Yeah. 5 countries. We encourage you to travel. It's definitely something that we encourage and back, but there are consequences to travel. And I think knowing how you look, how you present in the world is it one important factor. Knowing the class background that you come from, knowing the circumstances of workers, knowing the environmental cost, knowing all of these things can inform us to make us better travelers, make us make more informed choices when we travel to places, be more respectful of cultures, be more respectful of differences, try not to come in with an idea that we're right because we don't speak their language, of course, and we're treading in somebody else's territory. So I hope that this makes us all a little bit more mindful as we go out into the world. And even if you are a person who presents within the white world, that you will be more mindful of those traveling around you who may not present that way and may enter into difficulties and may just have your eyes open to be a helping hand should somebody need it. Just maybe. That's my roundup of this particular episode. I enjoyed this one and I learned something new. Economic migrant versus business traveler. Never knew. So this was a good one for me. Thank you, Mr. Storm.
You're welcome. Yeah, just a parting piece of information. If you're a woman, some of the safest countries for you to travel to would be Sweden, Rwanda, and I forgot what the other one was. But Rwanda's meant to be lovely. So if you want some nice warm weather, you want to be safe at night, walk about, not be bothered. And Thailand is also a very safe country. You can walk
I'm
about, not
happy
be
to go on
bothered.
vacation. I'm planning many vacations and have no money. So if you would like to sponsor us to take the dark side on the road to any destination, we are happy to do such an activity. Please do get in contact. PM, direct message, TC Storm, or Pastor Purple, and we will happily have that conversation with
You
you.
don't even need to do that. Just send my ticket. Yeah.
Well,
I'll be
they
on
need
the
to have a
plane.
conversation to
Don't
see
worry
where
about
to
that.
send the
Just send the
ticket.
ticket.
They need to have a conversation to see where to send the ticket to, brother. Where to send the ticket. Anyway, we wish you all the best for this evening. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time on the dark side, where we will be discussing more race, gender, class, intersections, and how it impacts our world. Peace out. It's frozen. You gonna say bye?
Nah. Latest, people.